learned about Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge from other bird watchers. They mentioned to me that they had 6 species of rails in that particular refuge. And since I never seen a film on rails on television, I thought, well, this is for me a thing to do. I contacted the refuge manager and I got a special permit to go in there, set up my trailer in there and live there for 3.5 months to do this particular film on Brazoria.
It's early spring, and London, Ontario's John Bax is on another exciting adventure. A one-man bird safari to a lonely refuge on the wind-blown Gulf Coast of Texas, where alligators raise their young in marshes filled with colorful nesting birds, where 270 bird species have been sighted. A haunting coastal landscape with a poetic, almost magical name, Brazoria. John Bax is no stranger to this region, to the better-known, more accessible wildlife refuges on the Gulf Coast. So this story does not begin in Brazoria. It begins instead some distance to the south, near the Mexican border and the mouth of the Rio Grande River, at Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge, where majestic white pelicans can be seen feeding among a spectacular array of migratory and resident birds.
Laguna Atascosa Refuge is just one of my favorite places. I've been going there for 6 years now, through all seasons, and the location is marvelous. It's on the coast, it's on the Gulf of Mexico, and then there is marsh, and there is semi-desert, which brings out a big variety of birds. And the location is just marvelous for bird watchers to come out and see all these different species there. And I love it.
Some uncommon species may be harder to find than others, even more difficult to observe and film. Water birds like this tiny, shy, least grebe, smallest of all North American grebes. A few nest year-round in Laguna Atascosa, usually some distance from each other. Least grebe pairs construct floating platforms of decaying aquatic vegetation, often anchored to plants in shallow marsh ponds. The sexes look alike, and mating takes place on the floating platform. Although it may suggest a momentary loss of balance or perhaps a lack of skill, that acrobatic forward tumble into the water is neither. It is a traditional part of the mating ritual. Good swimmers and divers, these hardy little grebes keep their feathers in good condition by preening. During incubation, which lasts about 23 days, the male will often provide food for the nesting female. The eggs may be turned occasionally or covered with vegetation for warmth and camouflage. Once the first chick appears, it can take up to 4 days for all the eggs to hatch. As protection against predators, eggshells are carried away from the nest. At times, both parents may be out on the pond searching for food for themselves and their growing family. But mother is not off the nest for long. Incubation continues, and soon a second chick breaks out of its shell. Within hours, parents encourage the hatchlings to join them in the water, but food is still brought to them on the nest. Sometimes a tiny grebe has to scramble to get out of the way. The fun begins when the chicks start to swim and ride around on their parents' backs. The eldest is first, soon joined by its sibling, on a sightseeing tour of the pond. Even at this stage, parents continue to provide the catch of the day. With its rich bounty of aquatic food, the coastal marsh pond seems a perfect habitat for raising young grebes, or for that matter, a whole range of wildlife species, including this awesome neighbor, the alligator. Over the years in Laguna Atascosa, John Bax managed to film several least grebe nests. Here we find 4 grebe chicks, cold and wet from swimming, huddled together for warmth, while once again a conscientious parent looks for food. Every 12 months, a mated pair may produce 2 or 3 similar broods. Magnificent great egrets are attracted to these coastal marshes where red-eared turtles sunbathe on half-submerged tree trunks, which have a habit of being slippery when wet. A seemingly insurmountable problem for at least one turtle. Anyway, it looks as if all the best seats have been taken. These turtles seem to have a better idea. Find a sun deck that's not too crowded and, if at all possible, has an almost level incline, so you can walk up easily without too much effort. The great egret seems to know how to conserve energy. As for these adventurous turtles, the spirit is obviously willing, but, well, they're just not built like monkeys. Or even ducks, for that matter. Laguna Atascosa combines coastal and semi-desert habitats. Signs of the American Southwest are everywhere. John Bax alone, as usual, but filming himself with a second camera, approaches a giant yucca. Here he discovers nesting black-shouldered kites. The 3-week-old kites are calling for their supper, waiting for father, who does all the hunting, to fly in with enough food for all. Black-shouldered kites are small hawks who feed on insects, rodents, snakes, lizards, frogs, and small birds. Much of the nesting diet has to be torn into bite-sized pieces by the look-alike parents. Standing guard, a wary parent seems to peer right into the lens of the camera. From below, the large, deep nest is well camouflaged. This is flycatcher country, and the resident species are sometimes difficult to distinguish, but all prefer to nest in cavities in posts and trees. They feed on berries, flies, and other winged insects, and also bring food back to the nest to feed their young, who usually remain inside, just out of sight. The original nest may have been built by a woodpecker, but the tenant in residence is most likely a brown-crested flycatcher. A pleasant surprise was this unique, well-constructed tree-hanging nest of the Altamira oriole, also known as the Liechtenstein's oriole, a species normally found in no other region of the United States or Canada. A gorgeous orange and black bird. The golden-fronted woodpecker is a colorful, boldly patterned Texas bird, a tree and pole cavity nester, a noisy, conspicuous, year-round resident of Laguna Atascosa. An adult flies in with a beak full of berries for the hungry chicks, who once again are hidden from sight inside their well-protected palm tree penthouse. That brilliant red cap identifies the adult male. This hummingbird nest was probably the most unexpected discovery. John Bax has filmed hummingbirds all over North and South America, but never before nesting black-chinned hummingbirds. The open, cup-shaped nest made it possible to observe the female parent feeding her recently hatched black-chinned hummers. At times, with mother off the nest, the chicks all but disappeared, but not for long. These miniature jewels of the bird kingdom are natives of the western mountains, only rarely sighted nesting here at the extreme eastern limit of their range. Trying out their wings in such crowded conditions is never easy. Siblings may have to take turns exercising. But it's one way to work up an appetite. What looks like a rather dangerous procedure doesn't seem to bother these tiny sword swallowers. If you're wondering where the name comes from, the adult male not seen here really does have a black chin. Kingfishers are fascinating birds that perch and hover over the water and dive for fish, which they catch in their long, sharp beaks. There are 3 kingfisher species that can be observed fishing together in Laguna Atascosa and nowhere else in North America. The male green kingfisher seen here has a green back and a rusty red breast stripe. He softens up his freshly caught shore dinner by tossing it around in his beak. And here is the speckle-breasted female, bursting into song. And nearby, another female, also a member of the pond choir. The females are equally skilled at diving for their dinner, often coming up with hors d'oeuvre-sized crustaceans. Kingfishers build nests in deep riverbank tunnels or burrows, so nesting photography was not possible. Instead, John focused on these stunning feeding sequences, at times placing a bamboo perching pole in likely marsh ponds. A handsome neighbor is the yellowish great kiskadee, a large flycatcher who, when diving, does a reasonable impersonation of a kingfisher. Now, stepping into the spotlight is the belted kingfisher, by far the most common and widespread North American kingfisher, a somewhat solitary territorial bird. The male has a wide belt of blue-gray feathers across its white breast, and characteristically there is a minnow in its mouth. As we've discovered, the fresh fish fillet will take a fierce pounding before being swallowed whole. Another look at the great kiskadee. And again, the male belted kingfisher, with its distinctive crown or crest, which could inspire many a fashionable hairdresser. A regal bird with the powers of concentration and instant reflexes of a born hunter, a popular subject for painters and woodcarvers. With such a bountiful seafood buffet, no wonder the kingfishers stay year-round in the coastal marshes of Laguna Atascosa. Possibly rarest of the three species is this big Mexican bird, the ringed kingfisher. North of the Mexican border, it can be found only in this region of the Rio Grande Valley. The same claim can be made for these secretive tree ducks, black-bellied whistling ducks, who nest and raise their young here. An average brood is made up of about 12 chicks, who rarely spend more than 24 hours on the nest before taking to the water. A parent may have spotted something. Alligators share some of the marsh habitats. A quick turnaround and the family moves away from potential danger. Whistling duck adults are shy and wary and strong flyers, but are not diving ducks. Also found in the lower Rio Grande is this beautiful tropical bird. The elusive green jay with its vivid green back, blue crown, and black throat. Great-tailed grackles may be found in the same area. Another unique inhabitant from Mexico is the plain chachalaca, a chicken-like woodland bird that forages for seeds and insects. This nocturnal bird of prey, the eastern screech owl, is an uncommon but well-established resident nester. Another glimpse of an Altamira oriole. And once again, the black and white banded, golden-fronted woodpecker. And almost by surprise, a familiar inhabitant of fields and marshes, the red-winged blackbird. Anolis, with 200 species, form the largest group of reptiles in the Western Hemisphere, but only the green anolis is native to the continental United States. Inca doves are small gray birds of the arid Southwest that mate and nest in Laguna Atascosa and may be observed from time to time. The green anolis, often confused with a chameleon, can change skin color according to its emotional state. The doves are quietly giving off their own signals. Territorial and other emotions obviously have something to do with the anolis' impressive throat fan display. Dove courtship heats up with a rather characteristic show of aggression between male rivals. Preening may help soothe ruffled feathers. As suddenly the wind begins to pick up. The lovebirds ride up and down on the swaying branch as nearby a songbird, the northern mockingbird, grows silent. But it's just a sudden gust of wind. and there is no storm on the way. Laguna Atascosa, where the desert southwest invades the coastal marshes, sheltered from the Gulf wind and waves by Padre Island, the southernmost waterfowl refuge in the United States, is a haven for birds and bird watchers. It was here that John Bax first heard about Brazoria and made plans to journey there one day. North of Freeport, Texas, Brazoria is a secluded coastal marsh and prairie habitat.
Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge is not open to the public. Just one weekend a month. For the rest, it's closed. So I was all by myself in that park, which I didn't mind. I like to be by myself and do the work I have to do. I was set up there with my trailer and no electricity, and the water I needed to drink I had to bring in from the outside. The day usually started at 6:30 in the morning, and it went on all day until it was dark. In the beginning I had to look for this rail nest, and it was very, very difficult to find them because they are so secretive to begin with, and in the beginning I listened for the sound where they were located, and this of course helped me for finding their nest. So it was all day out in the marshes, plundering through the marshes. In some cases when there was a high wind and it was high water, and sometimes the water was only that far from the nest. And I was afraid. In the beginning I found 5 nests of these rails, and I was afraid they were going to be all drowned. But I was lucky. When I examined the nest, checked them, then a couple days later, only one was drowned, and that one was close to the tidal waves. So the others had actually built up their nest very much like this, that high up. Another thing in the refuge is the snakes. I seen lots of snakes in there, and actually I like them, but I had to be careful.
Being careful means being able to identify the various snake species. Many are not dangerous: rat snakes, king snakes, and water snakes. But the pit vipers, rattlers, and cottonmouths are poisonous, and occasionally even deadly. A bad-tempered but harmless banded water snake may be confused with a dangerous cottonmouth or water moccasin. Adult black rails, yellow rails, Sora, and Virginia rails were sighted briefly in early May. But John's first exciting nest discovery belonged to what sounded like a king rail, but looked more like a grayish clapper rail, with a somewhat vocal mate standing in the wings. King rails and clapper rails often nest side by side in the brackish marshes of Brazoria. Some may be hybrids. The sexes share nesting duties, including incubation and nest maintenance. The female lays 1 egg a day until roughly a dozen eggs fill the nest, a clutch weighing more than the female bird herself. As protection from overhead predators, an arch or dome is constructed above the well-camouflaged nest. John managed to film only a few of these secretive rail nests scattered throughout the marsh, seldom less than 100 meters apart. Looking rather plump while sitting on the nest, this shy, elusive bird is truly skinny as a rail and almost invisible in the tall grasses. Adult rails are wary and alert. Raccoons, snakes, some prey birds, even coyotes may attempt to steal or destroy the eggs when the parents are off the nest looking for food: seeds, insects, crustaceans, frogs, and aquatic plants. Most of the time, John filmed from inside a blind, 3 or 4 meters from the nest. In this particular nest, he found only 8 or 9 eggs. Sometimes an adult returning to incubate has trouble covering all the eggs, although it will continue to try. One morning when John arrived to check the nest, he was delighted to find 2 black-feathered chicks being fed snails by one of the parents. On the nest now was a 3rd sibling. It would take another 3 or 4 days for all the eggs to hatch. A sheltering wing protects both the young rails and the eggs. At first, the older siblings seldom stray beyond the nest area, but still manage to get plenty of exercise. All this activity is combined with frequent rest periods, in the shade, out of the sun. The chicks often tumble out of the nest to meet a parent returning with a fresh supply of food. Every day, new members are added to the family. For lunch, tasty chunks of crab meat. When all the chicks have hatched, the entire family will leave the nest, but stay in the immediate vicinity, often venturing into the nearby mudflats to feed. The attractive speckled king snake, a constrictor, is one of John's favorite snakes. It may prey on small birds and chicks, but prefers rodents, lizards, and other snakes. Not dangerous to humans, it will even tolerate handling. In fact, the speckled king snake has a reputation for feeding on rattlesnakes. It was time to move on. There was more of Brazoria to explore. John had been lucky so far, finding the rails and photographing their nests. But filming wildlife is never as easy as it looks.
The wading in the marsh is something else. If you do that for a week, you're in shape. I can tell you that. But there is another disadvantage, of course, and that's the mosquitoes. I am not talking a million. We are talking here billions and billions of mosquitoes, which bother you all the time. And you can't do without repellent, really. You have to protect yourself against this little beast.
This prehistoric-looking 9-banded armadillo is a much larger beast than the mosquito. It's a close relative of the anteater and has been moving north from Mexico over the last century. Adult turkey vultures with bright red heads can be seen year-round in Brazoria. Their sense of smell is acute, leading them to dead armadillos, opossums, and other carrion. More aggressive black vultures with a weaker sense of smell follow turkey vultures to feeding areas and fight even among themselves for available food. The vultures appear to be immune to botulism and eat decaying meat that would kill most other creatures. Black vultures have gray-black heads, but to make identification a little more difficult, so do immature turkey vultures. A vulture's claws are relatively dull and weak, but they possess powerful bills for breaking bones and tearing meat apart. A young vulture with an injured leg seems determined to compete for food, but may have to work a little harder and pick up scraps wherever he can find them. It's also mating time, which may increase emotional tension on the upland feeding ground. This graceful walk or dance is a traditional courtship display. The vultures begin to copulate, but not without interruption. Native plants and wildflowers bring bright flashes of color to Brazoria's landscape, to Rattlesnake Point, Alligator Lake, Oyster Creek, and Gator Nest Pond. A common moorhen with its red bill and forehead is sighted swimming through the duckweed, feeding on the rich aquatic life. As landmark names suggest, alligators may be residing or nesting nearby. A moorhen parent shepherds her 10-day-old brood to safety in the tall reeds. A few stragglers hurry to catch up. Alligators are the largest reptiles in North America. John says they're rather shy around humans, except when protecting their nest. He's had good experiences with them and likes to photograph them.
There are quite a few, and there are quite a few big ones too. Biggest one I seen there was 12 foot long. I'm standing with this alligator sometime for 4 hours. I liked it. I could take very, very good close-ups of the animal, plus the young ones which were crawling on the mother's head and the back. But this all came out of spending quite a bit of time with the animal. Then they start to trust you, I suppose, but better keep your fingers crossed.
The young gators seen here are about 1 month old. They remain small and vulnerable throughout their first year. Mother remains with them during that time and is a devoted parent, often protecting them from adult male alligators who would prey on them. She also appears to have infinite patience, and as seen sunbathing at poolside, seems to know how to relax and conserve energy. Sloughs, open water channels, wind through the tidal marshes of Brazoria, a lonely, silent place. Except for the wind and the weather and the calls and songs of the amazing array of resident and migratory birds. Rarely observed in winter, the eastern kingbird appears each spring to nest in May and June in small marsh trees by the edge of the slough. These rugged flycatchers furiously defend their territories, often attacking passing crows and hawks. But they allowed John Bax to film them without a blind. The male brings insects and fruit to its mate on the nest. Glistening in the sun, spawning spotted gar thrash around in the shallows. John starts a second camera rolling and runs into the scene in a desperate attempt to move the elusive garfish back towards the camera. But they refuse to cooperate. More successful is this film experiment, providing a stunning portrait of a female Wilson's plover on an open ground nest. John sits under a sun umbrella 10 meters away, with a release cable attached to a stationary camera beside the nest, while a second remote-controlled camera films from the other side. During the afternoon, a male Wilson's plover wandered in and out as if nothing unusual was happening. Equally at home, laying its speckled eggs in the sand and gravel where they blend in with the multicolored stones, is the common nighthawk, a widespread species also filmed by remote camera. A squat, harlequin-patterned shorebird, the ruddy turnstone, nests in the Arctic but spends 3 seasons in Brazoria. It turns over stones, shells, and driftwood to get at food hidden underneath. Also possibly looking for food, an alligator moves out of the water and slips silently into the mud flats. This tall, slim bird is the black-necked stilt. It breeds in loose colonies in both fresh and saltwater habitats, and usually lays 4 to 5 eggs. Nests are vulnerable to tidal flooding. Another opportunity to identify a local snake. From head and body markings, it would appear to be the broad-banded water snake, which, although not poisonous, can inflict a painful bite. It was observed passing near John's trailer site. Somewhat snake-like in appearance, this legless lizard is the western slender glass lizard. It gets its name from the fact that its fragile tail can shatter like glass under stress. But eventually it grows back. Uncommon in Brazoria, the purple gallinule is one of the most beautiful of all marsh waterbirds. The sexes have similar plumage. A purple gallinule feeds on water insects, seeds, fruits, and aquatic vegetation. It moves about easily on land, hiding in the tall grasses. It builds a high platform woven into dense water plants and usually lays 4 to 5 eggs. Gallinule nests are scattered throughout the marsh, about 20 to 60 meters apart. John Bax had no difficulty identifying this coiled reptile as a rattlesnake, probably the western diamondback rattlesnake, well over a meter in length. Although filming rails had been his main objective, in May, John went exploring for nesting least bitterns, an uncommon species in Brazoria, rarely filmed in the wilds. The first nest he found, built just above the tidal water, had 4 bluish green and white eggs. In all, he found 15 nests. Some chicks had already hatched. A day later, he returned with his camera to begin filming 2 nests in detail. He was thrilled to finally have an opportunity to photograph these small, shy herons. But there were a lot of insects.
And it is very hot. You take almost all your clothes off. I sit there in shorts in this blind, and the sweat is just dropping down. It's really, really something. Sometimes I think I'm crazy to do these things, honestly.
The sexes share incubation, and John managed to record several nest exchanges. Raccoons and northern harriers are possible nest predators. Adults communicate when a nest change is desired.
In the beginning, I was sitting in a blind, but I wanted to take it from different angles, so I got out of the blind and I sat practically with this bird. Both adults were sitting only that far from me, and I could take pictures in extreme close-up, which was, I thought, for the least bitten, very, very, very unusual.
The eggs hatch 1 day apart. The adults make good parents. Territorial displays are common. During their first hours, the chicks start begging for food, which parents bring to the nest and feed to them by regurgitation. This looks like a tiny crab. 4 chicks are now visible. John was determined to film these skilled fishermen feeding nearby. He followed them, often as far as a kilometer from the nest, and managed to record these dramatic scenes. East bittern chicks are now a little older, the eldest about 5 or 6 days. Feeding on the nest continues. The young herons tug at the parent's bill. Soon the chicks start to wander from the nest through the tall grass, perching on green stems and branches. But they don't go far. The chicks seem to look on in wonder as their siblings display feats of daring and dexterity, like high-wire circus performers. It helps to have an appreciative audience. A safety net of grass cushions the fall. The audience remains spellbound. Another fateful step. Finally, we asked John if there was anything else he'd rather do than photograph wildlife.
I couldn't think of doing anything else, really. I've been working in a factory. I had to make a living, but when I started filming, I think my life started, really. It was something I was always dreaming of and doing it. It was just a thing to do, and I did it. I'm very happy for it. I did that, yeah.
John Bax, a unique wildlife cinematographer, bringing to life for all of us this exciting journey to Brazoria.